The air was thick with silence, a silence so profound it felt alive, pressing in from every tree, every shadow, every breath of the alien jungle. Sergeant Mason Riker adjusted the sling of his rail rifle and muttered under his breath. Yup, definitely not Kansas. He wasn't alone. Not entirely. Behind him, the rustle of foliage came with a scent, musky, electric, tinged with copper. He didn't turn around. He didn't have to. The scent belonged to it. The predator. It had no name in his language, only a title that the scouts had nicknamed it. The Crimson Fawn. A member of the Vaictal, a species revered across the Orion Rim for their deadly honor rituals and terrifying combat ability. To them, combat wasn't war. It was worship. Mason hadn't signed up for this kind of diplomacy. He was a recon specialist, not a gladiator. But one look into those glowing amber eyes earlier that day, and it was decided. No translator needed. A hunt had been declared. A trial of blood and skill, not for dominance, but for understanding. And Mason, somehow, inexplicably, had been chosen. 3 days ago, a Vaictal delegation arrived on EOS 7, a recently terraformed colony world. What started as a cultural exchange shifted the moment Crimson Fawn took a sniff of the Terran outpost and asked a single question. Who here has earned the right to be hunted? Most laughed. Mason didn't. Because the Fawn wasn't joking. And now, here he was, in the middle of a jungle biome engineered to simulate the predators of Earth and the terrain of the Vaictal homeworld, a neutral ground for a lethal game. But this wasn't just about survival. Something else was at stake. The Vaictal were ancient, advanced, terrifying, and until now, uninterested in alliances. But whispers among xenologists hinted that this ritual, this ancient hunt, was more than blood sport. It was an invitation. A test of character and worth. If Mason could impress the Fawn, Earth might gain a true ally. Or lose everything trying. He crouched near a tree, scanning the clearing with his scope. Heat signatures danced, small critters, insects. Nothing bipedal. Yet the hairs on the back of his neck wouldn't go down. That meant it was close. Mason grinned. Come on, you bastard! I know your game. Earlier, in the briefing, the xenolinguist had tried to warn him. The Vaictal see no difference between violence and bonding. If you hesitate, you fail. If you run, you die. If you show fear. I don't scare easy. Mason had interrupted. He was lying. But now, in this jungle, he couldn't afford lies. A low growl emerged from the canopy above. Mason ducked instinctively as a blur of motion landed hard beside him, cracking the earth. The Fawn towered over him, 7 feet of coiled muscle, armored hide, and tribal markings that shimmered like heat haze. In one hand, it held a curved blade made of something older than metal. The other hand? Empty. No weapons. No translator. Only a single, low click echoed from its throat, a challenge. The ritual was beginning. Mason slowly rose, hands away from his rifle. You want old school, huh? He reached for the combat knife at his thigh and twirled it in his fingers. Not as flashy as the Fawn's blade, but in his hands, it had carved through chaos more than once. For a moment, they circled each other in silence, alien and human. 2 predators. 2 species. Bound by ancient instincts. Then the Fawn lunged. Mason ducked, spun, slashed upward, and missed. The Fawn's reflexes were blinding, its blade singing through the air, stopping just shy of Mason's throat before pulling back. Not a killing blow. A warning. Mason smirked. All right. You want to dance? Let's dance. The next exchange was faster. Mason moved with fluid grace, dodging under a wild swipe and landing a solid punch to the Fawn's ribcage. It stumbled back, not in pain, but surprise. That's right. Not just prey. The Fawn barked something in its guttural language and leaped into the treetops, vanishing like smoke. Mason blinked. Okay. New rule, don't blink. He had expected a fight. He hadn't expected to be impressed. Or intrigued. He was trained to see patterns, adapt, survive. And what he saw in the Fang's eyes wasn't rage or bloodlust. It was calculation. Respect, maybe? This wasn't about dominance. It was about revelation. But if Mason was going to win, or survive, he had to think like a predator. Which meant knowing the terrain. He pulled up his tactical HUD, overlaying the jungle map on his visor. There. A rocky ridge 2 clicks northeast. High ground. Vision. Ambush potential. He took off running. Behind him, the jungle whispered. Somewhere above, something moved. As he ran, memories flickered. Afghanistan, New Nairobi, the ice caves of Europa. He'd faced death. Watched friends fall. But this felt personal. Not enemy. Not friend. Something in between. Brother. By the time he reached the ridge, night had begun to fall. EO7 had twin moons, both casting silver light through the canopy like ghostly spotlights. Mason crouched low, slowing his breath, eyes scanning every flicker, every shadow. And then, a rustle. A blur. A growl. He rolled just in time to avoid the Fang's silent dive. This time, the beast didn't go easy. Its blade came in fast, slicing air, forcing Mason into a brutal hand-to-hand scramble across the ridge. Knife met claws. Elbow met jaw. Dirt flew. Mason's heart thundered. His vision blurred with sweat. Then, a mistake. He slipped on loose gravel, falling hard. His knife skidded down the rocks. The Fang stood over him, blade raised. But it didn't strike. Instead, it extended a clawed hand. Mason froze. Was this mercy? No. It was the next test. Slowly, cautiously, he reached up and clasped the Fang's wrist. A deep, resonant sound echoed from the Fang's chest, almost like laughter. It pulled him up in a single, powerful tug. Then vanished into the night again. Mason stood there, panting, confused, adrenaline fading. What just happened? Somewhere in the dark, the Fang's voice echoed in broken English. You hunt with courage. But courage is not teeth. Mason shouted back. You'll find I've got more than teeth. A pause. Then, tomorrow, we hunt real prey. And just like that, Mason knew, this wasn't the end. This was the beginning. Of what, he didn't know. But something ancient had shifted. And he had earned something more than survival. He had earned its attention. Its respect. Maybe even, its trust. But tomorrow, the rules would change. Because whatever the real prey was, it wasn't going to be human. And they would hunt it together. The sun on EO7 rose like a bleeding eye over the treetops, spilling crimson light across the ridge. Mason stood at its edge, scanning the jungle below. The air buzzed, not with insects, but with expectation. He wasn't alone anymore. Perched beside him, crouched low with unnerving stillness, was the Vaictal known only as Crimson Fang. Overnight, the dynamic had shifted. They had sparred, tested, and tasted one another's strength. The ritual was incomplete, but the first lines of respect had been drawn. Now came the next phase. The real hunt. Target? Mason asked, breaking the silence. The Fang's eyes remained fixed on the valley below. Its mandibles twitched slightly before it replied in its gravel-thick voice. It woke during the storm. It slaughters without hunger. No honor. No code. A thing exiled from my people, long ago. Mason frowned. Another Vaictal? The Fang didn't look at him. No. Worse. A broken one. The words sent a shiver up Mason's spine. In Vaictal culture, broken ones were whispered about like boogeymen, warriors who had abandoned the hunt's sacred code and descended into madness. If what Crimson Fang said was true, then this wouldn't just be survival. This would be war. The Fang slid down the ridge, landing in near silence. Mason followed with less grace but enough skill to keep up. They moved through the underbrush like two wolves, one ancient, one new, either entirely trusting, yet drawn into the same pulse. Every few minutes the Fang would pause, sniff the air, then alter their path. It moved with instinctual grace, its clawed feet barely touching the earth. Mason, meanwhile, relied on his HUD scanner and his gut. Between them, they became something deadly. An alliance. They reached a clearing, ringed by shattered trees and scorched earth. The stench hit Mason first, burnt flesh, acid, and ozone. In the center of the space lay the remains of something once alive. Now, just mangled limbs and twisted armor. A Vektal scout. Mason knelt, frowning. Whoever did this didn't just kill him. They made a statement. The Fang approached slowly. For the first time since the hunt began, Mason saw hesitation. Pain, even. The creature knelt and placed a hand on the corpse's chest. My cousin, the Fang growled. He came to observe. He died, without blade in hand. That alone was a desecration in Vektal law. You said it woke during the storm, Mason murmured, scanning for heat trails. Then it's not just hunting. It's watching. Planning. The Fang rose. It remembers the old rites. But follows none. Mason stood beside him. Then we don't hunt it. We outsmart it. That got the Fang's attention. Explain. Mason motioned toward the perimeter of the clearing. See the trees? Broken outward. That wasn't a charge, it was an explosion from the inside. Your cousin wasn't ambushed. He was baited. He paused, then turned to the Fang. And so are we. Just as the words left his mouth, the treetops erupted. Something vast and sinewy burst through the canopy, a blur of armored limbs and blackened flesh. It hit the ground with a sickening thud, cracking the earth beneath it. Mason barely dove out of the way. The Fang was already in motion, blades drawn, eyes locked. The broken one stood twice as tall as its kin, its hide scarred with burn marks and crude metal implants. One of its eyes was gone, replaced with a glowing red lens. Its left arm had been replaced with a jagged blade of fused alloy and bone. But it was the mouth that struck Mason hardest. There was no war cry. No ritual call. Just laughter. Twisted. Mocking. The Fang charged with a snarl, and the two collided in a flurry of claws and fury. Sparks flew. Blood sprayed. It was beast versus abomination. Mason scrambled for his rifle and circled wide. He didn't have the brute strength to face it directly, but he didn't need to. Not yet. He sighted the broken exolimb. A weak point. He fired. The rail round slammed into the broken one's shoulder, staggering it just enough for the Fang to plunge both blades into its side. The creature roared and hurled the Fang across the clearing, slamming it into a tree with bone-breaking force. Mason cursed and fired again, 3 shots in rapid succession. One missed. One dented. One hit the lens. Sparks flew from the creature's face. It turned toward Mason now, its laughter replaced with something worse, silence. It moved. Faster than Mason could track. He was airborne before he even saw the hit. He hit the dirt hard, breath gone, vision blurring. His rifle skidded away, and by the time he reached for his knife, the creature was already on him. Claws raised. Then impact. The Fang was back, diving into the beast with a roar that rattled the trees. They rolled across the ground in a tangle of violence. Mason coughed blood and crawled toward his weapon. He found it. Lifted. Fired again, this time at the ground near the creature's feet. A detonation trap. The blast threw the beast's back. It rose, slower now, snarling. And then, for the first time, it spoke. You betray your kind, Crimson Fang. Its voice was broken. Glitched. Like something mechanical stitched into flesh. The Fang answered with fury. You are no kind of mine. Mason fired again, but the rifle was overheating. One more shot, maybe 2. He turned to the Fang. We need to end this. Together. The Fang looked at him. Something passed between them. Not words. Not gestures. Just an understanding. The broken one lunged again, but this time they were ready. The Fang ducked left. Mason ran right. In perfect sync, the Fang leapt and slashed the beast's legs, bringing it to one knee. Mason leapt onto a rock and fired his final shot into the creature's exposed throat. The blast wasn't enough to kill it, but it opened the door. The fawn landed on its back, drove both blades into the base of its skull, and twisted. The broken one froze, then collapsed. Dead. The jungle was silent again. Mason collapsed beside the corpse, panting. "Remind me never to vacation here." The fawn stood slowly, blood dripping from its blades. It turned to Mason. "You move like prey. Think like pack." Mason sat up. "I'll take that as a compliment." The fawn nodded. "You are not prey." Mason looked at the body of the broken one. "There more of them?" The fawn hesitated. "Not yet. But if one awakes, others follow." Mason's jaw tightened. "Then we'll need more than ritual. We'll need alliance." He didn't expect a reply. But the fawn stepped forward and reached out, not as a threat but a gesture. A warrior's bond. Mason took the hand, gripped it tight. "We hunt as one," the fawn said. "Not just a ritual anymore. A promise." The shuttle's rear hatch hissed open, releasing a cloud of cool nitrogen gas into the hangar. As the mist cleared, two silhouettes emerged, one human, one towering and horned, blood still drying on their armor. Everyone in Outpost Kappa 9 stared. Sergeant Mason Riker strode forward, bruised and stiff, his jaw set like iron. Behind him, Crimson Fawn stepped with the grace of a stalking tiger, its ceremonial blades resheathed across its back. Its amber eyes scanned the Terran guards without fear, but with curiosity. "Don't shoot," Mason said. "He's with me." The guards exchanged glances but lowered their weapons. Dr. Elsie Hargrove, the mission xenolinguist, rushed to greet them. "Sergeant, what in God's name happened out there? We lost telemetry halfway through your beacon trace. Then, no contact for 9 hours." Mason glanced at the fawn, who stood silent, looming. "We found your anomaly," Mason said. "Turns out it wasn't a storm. It was a broken one." Hargrove's face paled. "A Vaketal rogue?" Mason nodded grimly. "And it wasn't alone. There were signs, buried camps, old weapons tech, anti-ship jammers. That thing was waking up a nest." Hargrove turned to the fawn. "And this one, it helped you." "I didn't just help," Mason said. "He saved me." The fawn clicked its mandibles in something like agreement. Then, without ceremony, it knelt, on both knees, before Mason. Gasps filled the room. One of the Marines actually dropped his helmet. Hargrove stepped back. "It's performing a Vaketal oath of binding. I've only seen it in ancient texts." Mason blinked. "What does it mean?" She swallowed. "It means you are no longer his prey. You are his bloodkin. His brother." The fawn spoke, voice low and guttural. "You fought without fear. You spared me no dishonor. You did not flee when the broken one struck. You earned me." Mason wasn't sure whether to be proud or deeply concerned. The debriefing with Earth Command came swiftly and without warning. A high-priority uplink connected him to General Armitage, whose image shimmered above the outpost's main holotable. "Sergeant Riker," the general said, voice clipped and precise. "Is it true you've formed a direct bond with a Vaketal warrior?" Mason shrugged. "I didn't exactly plan it, sir. But yeah. Guess we're brothers now." The general didn't smile. "You do realize the political implications of this?" "Honestly, I barely understand the cultural ones." The general leaned forward. "Earth's been trying to get the Vaketal into a defense pact for over a decade. Every diplomatic envoy failed. But now, one of their top hunters swears fealty to a human grunt in the middle of a jungle?" "Not fealty," Mason corrected. "Respect. There's a difference." The general nodded slowly. "Then you're being reassigned." "What?" "You're going to their homeworld. We need someone they trust. Someone who speaks their language, metaphorically anyway." Mason laughed dryly. "Sir, I just survived a ritual hunt with a 7-foot murder lizard and killed a rogue warlord. I was hoping for a nap." The general's eyes sharpened. "You want a nap?" You've got 10 hours during the jump to Vakara Prime. Pack light. The holoscreen blinked off. Mason sighed. Crimson Fang approached from the shadows. We fly? The Fang asked. Mason nodded. Yeah. We fly. The journey to Vakara Prime was unlike any Mason had ever taken. The diplomatic cruiser Halcyon Flame was stripped of its usual frills, retooled for high-security first contact. There were no ambassadors aboard, just Riker, Hargrove, Crimson Fang, and a skeleton crew sworn to silence. Through the viewport, Vakara Prime loomed like a scarlet jewel, oceans of obsidian, islands of jagged crystal, and auroras that shimmered like blades slicing the atmosphere. As they descended, the comms crackled with guttural speech. Crimson Fang translated. They know of our hunt. They expect truth, and proof. Proof? Mason asked. The Fang gestured to the sealed crate in the corner. Inside lay the head of the broken one. They need to see what we killed, he said. And that we did it together. The landing bay was carved from volcanic stone, flanked by towering statues of Vaktal warriors locked in eternal combat. Mason stepped out into the dry heat, eyes adjusting to the crimson sky above. Dozens of warriors stood in ranks. Some wore armor polished to a mirror sheen. Others bore the scars of countless rituals. And at the center of them all stood a giant, taller than even Crimson Fang. Its armor was adorned with gemstones. Its blade glowed faintly with heat. The High Fang, Crimson Fang said quietly. Leader of the Hun world. Keeper of the code. The High Fang stepped forward. You are the human? I am, Mason said, heart pounding. You fought beside Crimson Fang. You killed the Broken One. Mason nodded. Together, yes. The High Fang extended a clawed hand, not in challenge, but in greeting. Then speak. What is it that you hunt now? Mason didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked around at the gathering of ancient predators, each bred for war, yet bound by law. He met the High Fang's gaze. We hunt peace. The silence was immediate. Then came the growl, low and rising, from the assembled warriors. Crimson Fang stepped forward. He speaks not of surrender. He speaks of strength without conquest. Of unity by choice. The High Fang circled Mason slowly. You are prey no longer. But you are not yet pack. Then test me, Mason said. The High Fang nodded once. So be it. They were led into a vast arena, a ring of obsidian surrounded by shrieking crowds. At the center stood a creature unlike any Mason had seen. It wasn't a warrior. It was something worse. A chameleon beast, bred in ancient Vaktal labs. Adaptive. Fast. A training tool for the elite. And this one hadn't been used in years. Crimson Fang leaned in. It will not kill you unless you fail. Comforting, Mason muttered. The beast struck fast, its hide shifting from black to red to green in pulses. Mason rolled, drew his sidearm, and fired twice. But the creature split like water, dodging effortlessly. It was all speed and unpredictability. He dove behind a pillar. The crowd screamed for blood. Crimson Fang watched from the sidelines, claws twitching. Mason steadied his breath. He thought back to the jungle. The Broken One. The coordination. The trust. Suddenly, he shouted, not at the beast, but at the Fang. Throw me your blade! A pause. Then, without hesitation, the curved blade arced through the air. Mason caught it mid-run and slashed wide. The chameleon beast lunged. Mason didn't dodge. He charged. The crowd roared. He feinted left, then ducked under the creature's talons and drove the blade deep into its throat. It collapsed with a gurgling screech. Silence. Then, the High Fang raised a fist, and the arena erupted. Crimson Fang entered the ring and lifted Mason's arm high. You are no longer alone, he whispered. Later that night, after the ceremonies, Mason stood atop a tower overlooking the obsidian plains. Crimson Fang stood beside him. You could have let it kill me, Mason said. I could not, the Fang replied. You are of my blood now. Mason nodded. This bond of yours, It runs deep. It is unbreakable. Mason exhaled. Then let's make it mean something. Crimson Fang tilted his head. Mason turned to him. The broken ones aren't just a Vektal problem. They're spreading. And if they can rise again, unbound by your code, unchallenged, then both our worlds are in danger. The Fang's mandibles clicked slowly. And you would fight with us? No, Mason said. We'd fight together. Crimson Fang looked out at the stars. Then tomorrow, he said, we hunt again. The message came at dawn, buried in static, clawing through long-range channels from the colony world of Meriden 4. It wasn't a distress call. It was a warning. Then silence. By midday, every feed across the Orion Treaty Network confirmed what Mason feared. Meriden 4 had gone dark. The satellite imagery showed only smoke trails, massive craters, and movement in the ash fields, predators, not bombs. The broken ones had returned. And this time, they were coordinated. Mason stood before the war table on Vekara Prime, surrounded by the sharp-toothed High Council of the Vektal. The chamber was half cathedral, half cave, etched with stories of every hunt, every sacrifice. The air tasted of fire and stone. Crimson Fang stood beside him, head bowed in reverence, but eyes locked on the digital map. Dozens of red pulses flickered across Meriden's northern hemisphere. Too many for one tribe. Too many for one world. These are not outcasts anymore, Mason said, voice low but clear. This is an uprising. The High Fang stepped forward, ancient blade resting across both hands. Then why come to us, human brother? This is your colony. You're dead. Mason didn't flinch. Because they didn't just kill humans. They slaughtered your scouts, your bloodkin. They used your own weapons, your own strategies, twisted. He stepped closer to the table, each word rising with heat. This isn't just a threat to Earth. This is a war on the code. A war on the hunt itself. Whispers stirred among the circle. Some growled. Others listened. Crimson Fang stepped forward. He is right. The broken ones do not seek survival. They seek desecration. If they take Meriden, they will not stop. They will consume system by system. They will call others. They will turn our rights into ruin. The High Fang narrowed his eyes. Then what do you propose, Sergeant Riker? Mason straightened. A joint strike team. Vektal and human. Not just to wipe them out, but to send a message that tradition and unity are stronger than chaos and fear. That we hunt together now. A beat passed. 2. Then, a younger warrior barked something in their guttural tongue. Crimson Fang grinned. He says, let us see if the human bleeds alongside us. I do, Mason replied. And I will. 4 days later. Meriden 4's upper atmosphere burned with entry flares. Dozens of dropships plunged through cloud and dust. Mason rode at the front of one, gear locked down, blade gifted by the High Fang strapped to his chest, and a reinforced Terran rifle humming at his side. Across from him, Crimson Fang crouched low, body still as stone. Around them, a mix of Vektal and Terran soldiers sat in silence, bound not by common speech but common purpose. Ritual scars crossed alien skin. Fresh armor gleamed under painted clan symbols. For the first time, the two species didn't look separate. They looked like a pack. Status? Mason called out. 2 heat blooms detected near the ridge, said Private Lang, eyes locked on the scanner. Moving fast. Too fast. The pilot shouted from above. ETA 2 minutes. Touching down in zone red 5. You'll have 40 seconds before they swarm. Mason nodded. Then we make those 40 count. The hatch hissed open mid-descent. Smoke. Screams. Explosions. The world outside was pure war. Crimson Fang leapt first, never hesitating, dropping straight into the fray with a battle cry that shook the air. Mason followed, hitting the ground hard and rolling to cover. The broken ones were everywhere. Twisted forms of former Vektal and rogue Terran mercs, bodies stitched with cybernetics, eyes hollow with madness. They moved like wolves, but fought like machines, ruthless and silent. Mason fired in bursts, covering the Fong as it tore through two attackers with surgical precision. The team spread wide, syncing movements, learning each other's rhythm. The battlefield pulsed like a heartbeat. Then a roar echoed across the valley. Something huge stepped from the smoke. It was massive. 10 feet tall. A hybrid. One of the first broken ones, now fused with scavenged dreadnought plating and fusion claws. Half a face. Half a machine. All hate. It looked at Mason. And it remembered him. Mason cursed. Big guy's back. The hybrid charged, carving a trench into the ground with each step. Mason ran, vaulting debris, dodging energy blasts, drawing it away from his squad. He needed an opening. Anything. Fong! He shouted into comms. I need a flank. Already hunting, came the reply. The hybrid struck. Mason barely dodged, his shoulder catching a graze that sent fire up his spine. He spun and emptied a full clip into the creature's chest. It flinched but kept coming. Then, above, Crimson Fong dropped from the ruins, both blades drawn, and buried them in the creature's neck. Sparks flew. The hybrid bellowed and flung the Fong like a ragdoll. No! Mason screamed, rushing forward. But Crimson Fong rolled with the impact, landing in a crouch. Injured but alive. The hybrid turned again, until a blade flew through the air and lodged itself in its eye. Mason's blade. It staggered. He followed with a leap, grabbing onto the damaged torso, pulling himself up. One hand. One chance. He drew the thermal charge from his vest. Say goodbye, he muttered, slamming it into the hybrid's spine. He dove clear. Boom. The hybrid imploded, steel, bone, and flame raining across the battlefield. Silence followed. Then cheers, from both humans and Vektal. They had won the field. Not alone. Together. Later that night, the survivors gathered around a cracked stone ridge overlooking the valley. Fires burned low. Wounds were stitched. Stories passed from one warrior to the next. Mason sat beside Crimson Fong, both wrapped in rough cloaks stained with blood and ash. You saved my life again, Mason said. Crimson Fong tilted his head. You earned it. Mason chuckled. I think I finally understand the hunt. The Fong looked at him. It is not about prey. It is about respect. About choosing who you would die beside. Mason nodded. And who you'd live for. They sat in silence a while longer. Then the Fong reached into a pouch and pulled out a shard of black glass, etched with the symbols of his clan. He placed it in Mason's hand. Take it, he said. You are not just bloodkin. You are hunt-bound now. Wherever the hunt goes, you walk with it. Mason stared at the shard. He'd come here as a soldier, as prey, as an outsider. Now he was something else. Not just ally. Not just brother. Pack. He stood and looked out at the stars. The war was not over. Other broken ones were still hiding in the dark. But now the galaxy would face something new. A human and a predator. Hunting as one. And heaven help anyone who stood in their path.